next, we will be exploring the value of a living ocean to our health and economic well-being, and the need for revitalized approaches to ocean economies, ocean innovation, capacity building, and private sector collaboration. I will now pass the floor to Martin Koering, who is the head economist Impact's World Ocean Initiative and will be moderating this Oceans Economy segment.
Great to be here. And happy World Oceans Day, everyone. So as Amber mentioned, I'm the head of the World Ocean Initiative, which is part of Economist Impact, part of the Economist Group, and we're very excited at the Economist Group to be a media partner as well of the official UN World Oceans Day event today. And we're actually covering this event today in terms of what's being discussed and so on. So have a look at ocean.economist.com, which is our kind of mini economist for the ocean. And obviously, we're trying to raise the profile of this event and of the ocean in general as a vital economic as a vital economic system and as part of the opportunities that we have in terms of blue carbon and natural based solutions and so on. Have a look, ocean.economist.com. So what we do is basically we cover the opportunities of building a sustainable ocean economy and revitalizing the ocean economy at the World Ocean Initiative, and that's why we're so excited to be part of this event. And key themes discussed today will be covered on our platform. And obviously we are very excited to be in Lisbon, the UN Ocean Conference, but also at the World Ocean Summit in Lisbon next year, particularly to bring the private sector and bring economic stakeholders into the conversation. So I'd like to welcome you to this session on a revitalized ocean economy. So this one will be focused more on the kind of economic dimension of the ocean economy and how to revitalize the ocean economy. And first we would like to have a keynote speaker, and I'm very excited and delighted to introduce him to you, Dr. Ralph Charmy, and he will be speaking about the value of a living ocean to our health and economic well-being. And he is Assistant Director at the International Monetary Fund and also a co-founder of Rebalance Earth. He's actually currently on a sabbatical from the IMF. He is working on two key risks to humanity, and looking at some key elements of how the ocean can help to restore the economy. And climate change, biodiversity loss are the key focus areas of his work. He has developed a model for valuing natural capital and a framework for kind of devaluing, evaluating nature-based solutions. And kind of develop nature markets for ecosystem services. He has co-founded two entities that work on bringing this new market to life, Rebalance Earth and Blue-Green Future, that are engaged in kind of realizing the value of the natural world to our well-being and also integrating into our economic system. So we're delighted to hear from him. Ralph, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to be here. It's extra wonderful to be here because my hero is sitting here, Sylvia. Sylvia gave me a homework a couple of years ago. I'm still working on it. But hopefully I have some good news to share with you. So the topic of my talk is about the value of a living ocean. So it's a complete move away from our extractive view of ocean. So I have good news to tell you, but let's start where we are right now. I was at COP26, and then I just came back from Stockholm 50, and it finally dawned on everybody that we are all facing two risks, not just climate change risk, but we're also facing what Sir David Attenborough has been telling us for many, many years, is that the loss of nature itself and its biodiversity. These are two risks that are taking place at the same time. We had been focusing on climate only, but next to it is the loss of nature itself and its biodiversity. And if any one of these two risks were to materialize, our own existence is at risk. However, these two risks are linked together through our behavior. Our our behavior, human activity, is what is bringing this calamity, self-inflicted calamity, upon ourselves. So to fix the problem, we cannot fix one risk and then tackle the other, because both are happening at the same time. We need to fix them both at the same time. Question is, how are we going to do that? And what I want to share with you is this story has a very happy ending, by the way, so stay put. So the way to do that is to go through natural capital, looking after Mother Nature. Now, Mother Nature will look after us, as she always did since time immemorial, and will help us also reduce climate risk, and this is what I want to show you. But how did we arrive at this calamity? Well, that's because somewhere along the lines, I mean, if we had more time, I would delve into how we arrived at this erroneous behavior or belief that somehow we live outside of nature, that the economy is outside of nature. This belief, which came about the time of the sort of Descartes time, the Cartesian paradigm, which fueled the Industrial Revolution, got us into this belief that we can pollute with impunity, we can extract with impunity, and somehow get away with it. And the answer is no. All the growth that we've developed is now we find out it's unsustainable. It's causing the climate calamity, which boomerangs to us back in terms of the death and the loss of biodiversity and the ecosystem services, and now we're facing both of them at the same time. So obviously this behavior has to change. It's within our remit. It's, we are always told, once you see the light, you cannot walk in darkness. So now we know the light, we have enough to know what we've done wrong and we know enough of how to actually move forward. And that's what I want to show you. So what ought to be the correct paradigm? Well, the correct paradigm is what our ancestors already knew. There's nothing new here. That nature is our home. It's always been our home, and we need to come home. We've been lost for a while. Think of it like the prodigal son coming home, but coming home wiser and more humble, and while there's still time. So what does it mean that nature is our home, where everything that we do is part of nature? What does it really mean? Well, in the language of economics, in my creed, they like to call these things, is nature macrocritical? Well, of course it is. The ancestors knew that, but somehow we need to rediscover it again. That's fine. So let's start. Well, guess what? I thought I would start with something many of you may not know, but of course, our deepness and our highness, she knows all about that. That the open ocean, this is the orphan among all of the natural capital, because it doesn't belong to anybody. It belongs to everybody, and therefore it belongs to nobody. This open ocean, this is, by the way, out of the IPCC report, has been capturing carbon. Since we are focused on climate change, it's all about grabbing, sequestering, reducing carbon. So I thought I'd focus this talk about carbon, although we can talk about other ecosystem services. So the open ocean, between 1890 and today, has grabbed over 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide, which is really incredible, okay? Incredible. On behalf of humanity, it's been doing it quietly, silently, without much fanfare, okay? This comes from the science. What does science also tell us? Well, science also tells us that these microscopic organisms that float in the water, called phytoplankton, do something really incredible. They breathe. They do photosynthesis. They give out 50% of the oxygen that we breathe. So every other breath that you take, you should be thanking the phyto for. But in return, they suck in about 30% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So really, the phyto is where the organic life of the ocean really starts. It's there. But science goes further now. This is more recent science telling us what? That even creatures are helping us out. Even the whales, this is the story about the great whales, that these great whales grab carbon on their body, equivalent to 1,500 trees. Can you imagine? On their body. And because they're so heavy, they're negatively buoyant. When they die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean. And anything below 1,000 meters is really sequestered for eternity. But they also do something very interesting. These guys like to eat krill. They love to eat krill. And because they eat so much krill, excuse me, it's right before lunch, they poop a lot. And their poop happens to do something really, really incredible. They fertilize the phyto. Because their poop has in it phosphorus, nitrogen, and iron. And iron is a limiting factor in the ocean, especially in the Southern Ocean, away from the rivers and the movement of wind over land. So these whales are incredible. So they're very smart. They fertilize the phyto. More phyto, there's more krill, there's more food. But for our purposes, from our perspective, because there's more phyto and phyto is more active, that means they're grabbing more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So these whales, through the carbon that they have on their body and indirectly through their fertilization of phyto, one whale is equivalent to thousands of trees. Imagine. Great ally in the fight against climate change. Guess what? But it's not only the whales. Okay? Already others have spoken about this. Mangrove, seagrass, salt marsh, kelp forest, peatlands, wetlands, these are all incredible living system, please underscore living system, that are grabbing carbon dioxide silently, quietly. All right? But they also do much more than that. They are great defense against flooding. Scientists, for example, in Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, figured out that seagrass alone, when it's healthy and is working fine, it's the natural bed for all of these fishes. They discovered that when there's seagrass, there's more fish, and there's a very nice knock-on effect on coral reefs. So what does this all tell us? Well, this is telling us that biodiversity of a living system, please, of a living system is incredible for us. It's about life of the ocean. The ocean is a living system. It's incredibly valuable. But we can do more than that, because I'm a financial economist. So you tell me something is valuable, I say, well, in dollar amounts, what does that mean? Why? Because that's how my creed thinks. That's how policymakers think. If you want them to change their minds, you have to take all that beauty of science and convert it into dollars and cents so they can really understand and make decisions. So let's convert that science. Let me be the translator. I try to be a good translator. And translate that science into dollars and cents and see what happens. Here's the first thing that we discovered. When we said, if you were to look at the whale and value her services to us just in carbon sequestration alone, okay? This is not the value of the whale, because the whale intrinsically is priceless. This is just if you want to pay her a salary for grabbing carbon on behalf of humanity. All right? It's $3 million. $3 million just by frolicking around doing what nature wanted her to do, which is to live freely in the ocean. Okay? Look at this one. This is a report we just finished a month ago. So Sylvia, I'm getting there. All right? All right? She asked me to value the fish. I'm working on it. All right. So this is the seagrass that we lose. This seagrass, you know what? Because I go to these resorts, or so I've, not as often, and I see the beachgoers. They complain about their feet touching seagrass. So you see the resorts chopping this gold. I mean, really? This is seagrass. We just finished this report for UNEP and Greta Rondo. Value of seagrass just in carbon sequestration alone is over $2 trillion. Can you imagine? If you add to it how much the value of seagrass in flood control, you would add $2 trillion more to it. And if you were to value the seagrass from how much it enhances fishes in the ocean, that's trillions more. We lose that because resorts don't want the beachgoers to have their feet touch seagrass. What else? Look at this one. This is the open ocean that belongs to no one. This is the Orphan. The Orphan that's capturing carbon on behalf of all of humanity. If you look at the value of the stock, I'm not even talking about the flow of carbon into that ocean, it's $30 trillion, the value of the carbon that's sitting in the seabed. Okay? And if you ask me how much is it capturing on a flow basis, the present value of that flow is another $30 trillion. That's how valuable is a living and thriving ocean is to us. Now, the science tells us, great news. This is new science. Okay? We can come around and value it. Are we out? Is this like, this is it? Is this the good news, Ralph? Well, unfortunately, the ocean is still suffering, despite all of these discoveries. Why? When you look at the ocean, the governance is fragmented. So many organizations tackling so many different aspects. It's suffering from overfishing. It's suffering from mining of the ocean, bring back all that carbon that is sequestered back into the atmosphere. So we have a problem to solve, and let alone talking about what the species. I mean, the whales themselves are victims of ship strikes, sonar testing, seismic testing, plastic pollution, being caught in nets. That's why we're decimating their numbers. So we're not out of this. So how do we get out of this calamity? Well, the science tells us what a valuable living system is to us, how valuable nature is to us. We can even, as finance people, figure out the value of it. But what's missing? What's missing is the policy action. A very old saying said, once you see the light, you can't walk into darkness anymore. We need political will. That's all that's missing now, because we have enough science to act. Okay? We have enough science to act. We need the political will to act. And action can take different forms. Some people are working on the legal rights of nature. Some people want to confer personhood on nature. How wonderful is that? Okay, I'll give you examples of it. Some people want to make it, a criminal act if you criminalize any action against nature. These are the ecocide. And some people from the financial side think of it, no, it's enough to think of it as a living asset, and we can build the whole markets around it. So that's what I want to show you next. Here are some examples of action being taken. Chile just have a new president, and now they're forming their new constitution, and I got hold of the draft that is still being worked on, and there's something called Article 9 where they say nature has rights. Imagine. On New Zealand, they're ahead of the curve. They conferred personhood on rivers, meaning a river has the same rights, and you have this as you and me, and we have responsibilities towards that river. How wonderful is that? Okay? In Costa Rica, they've conferred personhood on bees. This is how we show appreciation. This is how we reciprocate the love that we've been receiving from the ocean since time immemorial, through action. But once you have these three things, once you have the science, you have the valuation, and you have the policy action, okay? We're still, in terms of the ocean itself, okay? In particular for the ocean, we need to look at the ocean as a living system, not just there for us to grab from it, or to throw things in it, or to kill anything that breathes in it, okay? But once you have those three pillars of science, and finance, and policy action, then the markets, because I come from the markets, then the markets start to say, oh, you're serious now. And if you're serious, we can help you. So, the first thing markets will say, once you take the policy to recognize nature legally, then nature becomes, in the language of us from the finance world, becomes capital that can enter your balance sheet and change your net worth. Then is when the markets start to act. And I want to give you an example of something that we're doing. Here's an example of, since it's all about carbon, right now we're obsessed with carbon sequestration, and we have all of this commitments by countries and companies to go carbon zero, carbon negative, carbon neutral. Guess what? You can purchase all that carbon from nature. So here's on the left side, you have the buyers. Who would be the buyers? Could be, big companies, could be households, could be individuals that want to offset their carbon footprint. They would purchase not the asset itself, never the asset itself. The asset remains free to frolic as nature deemed it to be. You buy the services of the asset. You're paying the asset, basically a salary. That money goes in, could be for the whales, could be seagrass, salt marsh, kelp forests, peatland, wetlands, doesn't really matter. As long as that money goes in to look after the asset in perpetuity, because we have an ethical and moral obligation to look after nature in perpetuity, just like nature has been looking after us. And the money goes in to look after the stewards of nature. And the stewards of nature are the local communities and the indigenous people who live with nature. They understand the intrinsic value of nature, but they need the financial power to withstand all the offers of extraction that are coming at them on a daily basis. Once you do all of that, notice what happens. This is the story I wanted to tell you. It's a win-win-win. There are no losers in this new economy. Nature wins. The sellers of the, in this case, just carbon, the sellers of the carbon, the communities would benefit, governments would benefit, the offsetters would benefit. There are no losers here. It does not have to be a win-lose proposition as we were trained. And I'm guilty of having taught my students that, unfortunately. But I saw the light. And I saw the light in 2017 on a boat in the Sea of Cortez, in a 25-foot boat, watching a 120-foot-long blue whale as she fed quietly next to our boat. That's a blue whale. Just to give you an idea, you can fit an African elephant in her mouth. That's how big she is. So it's the largest creature that ever lived on this planet. She is feeding next to us. And I thought, where have I been? Well, I finally arrived, and I hope you do too. I want to end it with one thing. Carl Sagan once wrote a beautiful book called The Pale Blue Dot. Every time I read that essay, and I invite you to read that essay, or to listen to Carl Sagan as he narrates his own essay in his own voice. And he talks about, he asked NASA for Journey to take one last snapshot of Earth before it left our system, solar system. And what it showed was this pale blue dot. And he wrote this gorgeous essay called On It, Everything You Ever Loved. Everything you know lives on this planet, the only planet we'll ever it's our only home, the only home we've ever known. Now, with his permission, I'm just going to change it a little bit and say, the only home we'll ever know. So, nature has looked after us, the oceans have looked after us, and it's time for us to give back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ralph, for these very insightful words. I mean, while we get the stage ready for the next panel, I'd just like to summarize some of the key insights from Ralph. So obviously, he highlighted that we need to look at the ocean as a living system. The emphasis is on living, and he highlighted that the nature is really the overarching system. The economy is part of that, and the idea of a nature-based economy is really powerful. So we look at nature not as something that is external, and the ocean that is external to the economy, but very much an integral part of it. And also he highlighted the risks that there are still in terms of the undermining the value of the ocean, in terms of biodiversity loss, climate change, plastic pollution, and so on. But also it was really powerful to hear about the economic benefits. I mean, just thinking about the ecosystem value of whales, and also the seagrass, 2.3 trillion just in carbon sequestration benefits. I mean, that's enormous. And you highlighted, that science, finance, and policy need to work together, and particularly given the conversation we're having now, looking at some of these kind of ocean ecosystems in terms of new asset classes is really powerful and provides lots of opportunities for the future. So thanks a lot again, Ralph, for all these great insights. So now we have an opportunity to follow on from this conversation through a panel conversation. So we have three excellent and experienced panelists that will be joining me here on stage. So first of all, we have Kendra MacDonald. She is CEO of Canada's Ocean Supercluster. We have Andrew Hudson. He is head of Water and Ocean Governance Program at UNDP. And last but not least, Whitney Johnston, Director of Ocean Sustainability at Salesforce. Welcome on stage. So yes, we have about 40 minutes. So let's there's a lot to talk about, and there's a lot of exciting topics that Ralph touched upon. I'd like to focus on 4 key topics, and it would be great if we can each of us gets a lot of enough time to talk about these. So let's keep our answers as short and to the point as possible. So first of all, talking about what actually does a revitalized ocean economy actually entail? What is a revitalized ocean economy? So that is definitely something we need to discuss. And how do we build a framework, for kind of this collective action that we need? We heard earlier in some of the panels about the need for collaboration, the need to work together. So how do we build that framework to kind of revitalize the ocean economy in terms of governance and policy? And I'd also like to, ask the panelists about, how can we help ocean entrepreneurs? We heard earlier the inspiring stories from, the spotlights of revitalization. So how can we in the ocean community and as stakeholders in the ocean economy, how can we enable and empower ocean entrepreneurs, startups, and other stakeholders to build a sustainable ocean economy? And finally, to kind of touch upon some of the the topics that Ralph talked about, how can we link this back to the role of blue carbon and more broadly the role of the blue finance, and what are the new blue finance tools to help us help restore the ocean, but also help support local communities? So without further ado, let's start with what does it mean to have a revitalized ocean economy? What does a revitalized ocean economy entail? So I'd like to start with Kendra. I mean, as CEO of Canada's Ocean Supercluster, you're responsible for kind of driving the sustainable growth of Canada's ocean economy. What does a revitalized ocean economy mean to you, and how do you promote the revitalization of the ocean economy through your work?
Okay, so first of all, it's absolutely amazing to be able to be here, to walk the streets of New York for the first time in a few years. Last night was just terrific. As a Canadian, I did want to take a moment, not only happy World Ocean Day, for us it's also National Indigenous Awareness Month, so I did want to take a moment to acknowledge that land that is Canada is also, it is the ancestral and unceded territory of the First Nations and Métis and Inuit people. And so in this month and always, we acknowledge their rich history and heritage, their resilience and diversity, and we also acknowledge the harms and mistakes of our past, and we are working really hard to move forward in a spirit of collaboration and reconciliation. So with that, it's thrilling to be able to bring the Canadian perspective here and talk a little bit about the work of Canada's Ocean Supercluster. We are a cluster of over 500 members across Canada, and we are really working together to change the way ocean business is done, which I think is a huge step towards revitalization of the ocean. So we are working to build an ocean economy that is more digital, sustainable, and inclusive. We're working to accelerate ocean innovation and really increase collaboration. And so for us, it's really about bringing the conversation around health of the ocean and productivity together. They are one conversation. A more productive ocean is a healthier ocean. And so how do we work together in all that we do with the various solutions that we are building to be able to build a stronger ocean economy? And I think the UN Decade of Ocean does provide a platform. It connects us in conversation like here. The more that we have conversation, the more that we raise awareness, the more that we're able to draw other perspectives and thinking into the conversation, the further along on this agenda of joint action and change will we get. So I'll stop there.
Great, thanks a lot, Kendra. I mean, you highlighted that need for collaboration. We'll get to that and examples of kind of concrete examples of collaboration in the ocean space. You mentioned the need to connect health and productivity of the ocean, and obviously you're doing a lot of great work there, bringing different stakeholders in Canada's Ocean Supercluster together, and highlighting the need to connect this with communities, as you highlighted with the Indigenous communities. Whitney, I'd also like to ask you about what does a revitalized ocean economy entail? I mean, you joined Salesforce as the director of ocean sustainability, and you're actually a climate scientist and oceanographer by training. So you focus on kind of how can kind of businesses develop kind of sustainable solutions that kind of deliver value to society and nature. What does the revitalized ocean economy mean to you, and how do you promote the revitalization of the ocean economy through your work at Salesforce?
Okay, well, thank you. Before I begin, I just also wanted to thank everyone here for everything you do for the ocean, and everyone who's watching today, and also the organizers for having me today. Revitalization is just the right theme for this moment. To me, it also is a reminder of why one reason why I do this work. The ocean definitely revitalizes me when I'm in the ocean. I feel that. But beyond that, I think it's also, revitalization also speaks to a broader vision that we have, as you said, for a revitalized ocean economy, a sustainable ocean economy. An ocean economy, as Ralph Shami has said, is not extractive, but is regenerative. And one way in which we participate in that revitalized ocean economy is through blue carbon. So Salesforce has an ocean sustainability program that was established last year, and a flagship program within that is our blue carbon program. So as Salesforce is working to decarbonize our business, we also then purchase carbon credits to offset the residual emissions. And some of the carbon, one of the key areas that is very important to us is looking for carbon credits that can deliver for climate and nature and communities. And that blue carbon is a perfect fit for those in order to deliver on so many different fronts. And so that's one of the reasons why we're very interested in blue carbon and have been building a robust blue carbon program and investing in the development of that market.
Great. Thanks a lot, Whitney, for highlighting that. I mean, obviously, linking perfectly to what Ralph talked about in terms of bringing nature, communities, and the economy together through the work you do on blue carbon. And we're going to talk about blue carbon, hopefully, if we have time at the end in more detail. And Andy, I'd like to ask you as well. I mean, the ocean economy contributes obviously substantially to human development. Food security, transport, energy, tourism. There are lots of opportunities. There are estimates that it actually contributes like $3 trillion per year to the global economy, and these are all areas that are critically important, of course, to UNDP. What does a revitalized ocean economy mean to you, and how do you promote the revitalization of the ocean economy through your work at UNDP?
Thanks, Martin. Actually, you just stole my opening remarks. And exactly, the ocean economy, if you add up the shipping, the fisheries, the coastal tourism, the oil and gas exploration and exploitation, and other things, yeah, you get $2.5 to $3 trillion as the market value of the ocean economy. That, of course, doesn't include the much higher non-market, ecosystem services the ocean provides. Then, if you start looking at how much the value, the socioeconomic value of the damage and the losses to ocean ecosystems is. For nitrogen, we estimate about $200 billion a year globally. For invasive species, about $100 billion a year globally. For loss of habitat, we don't even know, really, but it's definitely also very large, hundreds of billions of dollars. Plastics, I've seen numbers as high as $2.5 trillion per year. That seems high, but either way, it's big in the hundreds of billions, no doubt. And then, of course, climate change. I mean, business as usual scenarios for 2100 and so forth go into, literally trillions of dollars per year in lost ecosystem services and economic activity from the ocean. So even if you take the lowest common denominator in those numbers, you're going to get $1 trillion a year minimum in the socioeconomic annual losses of mismanagement and misuse of the ocean. So for us at UNDP, when we define the blue economy, first and foremost is that recovery, restoration, and protection of those now lost economic services. And of course, those are jobs, livelihoods, GDP, poverty reduction, etc. So that to us is the fundamental ingredient to really the first step in a sustainable blue economy.
Great, thanks, Andy. You highlighted the need to, to focus on the loss and damage as well, not just on the benefits of having these ecosystems, but the damage we're doing and the economic damage that causes, and the need for recovery, protection, restoration as well. I'd like to follow up on that. I mean, obviously at UNDP, you help to kind of advance kind of regional and global multilateral agreements, and it's so important to build the right framework for this kind of collective action, to collaborate, to revitalize the ocean economy. So you focus a lot on building capacity to address these kind of threats to large-scale ocean sustainability issues and support the creation of kind of a policy environment for ocean restoration. So how do we build this kind of framework for collective action, collaboration? How can we optimize that framework to help revitalize the ocean economy?
So maybe to at least get a little away from doom and gloom, which is not that we shouldn't have some doom and gloom, but I'll give you a couple of success stories on both the regional scale and even the global scale on ocean governance for improving ocean sustainability. The first is you go into the, say, early, mid-90s. The West and Central Pacific tuna stocks were largely unregulated, poorly managed, and quite frankly, largely being harvested by distant water fishing nations versus the Pacific Island nations wherein these fish stocks sat. Over the last 20 years, UNDP, with the financing from the Global Environment Facility, working with the Pacific Island nations and the Forum Fisheries Agency and other partners, supported a long-running effort to bring 100% sustainability to those fish stocks, which are over half the tuna catch of the world in the West and Central Pacific. So we supported all the countries from the beginning, for example, in the negotiation process for what became the West and Central Pacific Fisheries Convention, which is now widely regarded as one of the best applications of the UN Fish Stocks Agreement. We helped ensure they got a fair deal in that negotiation. And then the ensuing years, we supported them in putting in place their policies, their regulatory instruments, their national institutional structures to meet their obligations under this convention. And in the end, the results were really quite amazing. As of about a year ago, about 49% of the tuna catch in the West and Central Pacific is by Pacific Island nations. It's contributed to a huge increase in their GDP. It's roughly doubled the contribution to GDP. Their exports of tuna have doubled from $500 million a year to $1 billion a year. It's created 10,000 new jobs in the region, and of course, gathered this ownership of the resource. So that's one success story. At the global level, if I have one more minute, is that okay?
Yes.
Yep, thanks. At the global level, similar time, late 80s, early 90s, it was very clearly recognized by the scientific community that the huge problem of invasive aquatic species, both in the ocean but also in freshwater ecosystems. We have the stories of the zebra mussel in the Great Lakes, the comb jellyfish in the Black Sea, and many, many others. So again, we began a concerted effort, again, over, in the end, 20 plus years with the Global Environment Facility, with the International Maritime Organization, recognizing, of course, at first that the main vector for transfer of invasive aquatic species is the huge international shipping industry with 80,000 huge ships moving about the planet carrying, I think the estimate was 5 billion tons of ballast water all over the world. So that was the driver, of course. So again, over a long time frame, we created this program, we called it Globalist, which supported, in the end, upwards of 80 countries and putting in place their policy and regulatory and institutional frameworks to adhere to what was in parallel negotiated, I skipped a step, in parallel the world negotiated through IMO, of course, a new international legal instrument on ships' ballast water. And that came into force in 2017. In fact, the same year we finished Globalist. And so the other exciting thing about that, again, from an economic perspective, was that treaty and the obligations of that treaty to the shipping industry created what amounted to about a $40 billion ballast water treatment industry. So it created incredible amounts of research and innovation to develop the kinds of technologies that could treat the ballast to the quality and cleanliness that the world required. So that's a great story, a success story. I can actually safely say that the world is a lot safer now from aquatic invasive species than it was, say, 20 years ago.
Amazing. I mean, those are exactly the examples we need, Andy, in terms of how we can build these kind of collaborative frameworks. I mean, you mentioned the great work on restoring fishing stocks in the West and Central Pacific, and the shipping industry ballast water example is another great example of how collaboratively we can work on policy frameworks to help revitalize the ocean economy. Whitney, I'd also like to ask you about the role of policy engagement, and obviously advocacy and collaboration is really crucial for your work as well. I mean, what is your view on ocean governance and where it is going? I mean, how do we build a framework for collective action? How do we collaborate to revitalize the ocean economy?
Well, I'm glad that you asked, because we actually published our view on ocean climate policy today. And the reason that we did this, and I'll explain what the point of view is and the perspective is, but the reason that we did this is, as Andrew has explained, how Ralph has explained in around policy, policy sets the context in which we live. And the policies that we create today will shape our future. And so I think we have a responsibility, and we also have an opportunity to communicate our values and our vision for the future of the ocean to our policymakers. And this is why then Salesforce, we reflected on our values, and we worked within, in fact, last year, we released our climate policy principles last year during Earth Month. And then over the past year, then we've reflected on what do those climate policy principles mean when it comes to the ocean. And today we published our ocean policy priorities, our ocean climate policy priorities. And these include 3 components. One is the need to invest in the restoration and protection of ecosystems and coastal communities. So you can think of marine protected areas, or as we heard from, I think it's Kate Orff today, regarding the living infrastructure, the green infrastructure that can protect our coastal cities. And then also blue carbon markets. That would be a piece of investing in protecting and restoring our coastal ecosystems and communities. And then the second component of our policy priorities is avoiding and reducing plastic pollution. And our perspective is to look at the plastic pollution issue from a whole systems view, and address the issue throughout the life cycle of plastic. And then the third priority that we announced today is avoiding and reducing large-scale emissions through 2 strategies: the deployment of responsible offshore wind, and responsible being a key word, and then the second, decarbonized shipping. And so that's the framework that we've announced. But we put this out there as an invitation for others to join us in collective action. Because I do believe that when individuals reflect on their own values and find a way to communicate that to their representatives, and also when other organizations can communicate in chorus with one another the value and the vision that we have for the ocean, I really do think that we can make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yes, amazing. I mean, Whitney, that's a great timing as well, publishing your ocean policy priorities on World Ocean Day. And you highlighted, the 3 key components: restoring ecosystems, the link to blue carbon, as you mentioned, fighting pollution, and also, harnessing the opportunity to reduce emissions through decarbonization of shipping, for example, the offshore wind opportunity. So great that you're working on this. And obviously, Kendra, for you, kind of fostering new partnerships, kind of innovative projects through collaboration is obviously important to revitalize the ocean economy. It's the heart of what you do at Canada's Ocean Supercluster. You bring together, the research community, industry, business, and so on, and policymakers across different sectors, regions. So tell us a little bit more about, your experience of building these collaborations and between industry, between different stakeholders, and what is best practice in terms of, collaboration and bringing different stakeholders together.
Yeah, so the Ocean Supercluster is part of innovation policy for Canada. So we are the result of policy, and I would say one of the key learnings for our companies is collaboration is hard. It is hard to work through. It takes more time to figure out the nitty-gritty, but once it's figured out, what we're really seeing now is just the momentum and energy and transformational things that we can do by being able to work together. So maybe I'll talk about a couple elements of that. Certainly one of those is we are cross-sectoral. So we have members across multiple ocean sectors working together to tackle common challenges. So automation and sustainable practices, workforce development. And so they are able to get farther by being able to bring these bigger consortiums together to tackle challenges. We have an example, which is a project in fish tracking, and they are aquaculture, working with fisheries, working with shipping, working with energy, working with university, and working with government all together to look at different applications for fish tracking and how to be able to get better data for better decision making, whether that is environmental data, whether that is fish movement, predictive fishing, et cetera. So there's an example. We've got pan-Canadian collaboration, so we are a big geography, and we're increasingly seeing international collaboration. And so we are one ocean at the end of the day. What we do affects everyone else, and so the more that we are able to do things as one, the more that we're able to do something on the ocean that serves multiple purposes then we are having less of a footprint in terms of the work that we are doing. And I think the other piece, we bring together government and research, small and large business and investors. And I'll just pull on research for a second. There's tremendous research going on all over the world. We've heard about that this morning. And, for me, part of the UN Decade of Ocean is raising awareness of all of those research outcomes and connecting them to industry so that we're really able to apply that research and have those conversations. So we're really looking at ways to be able to continue to connect those dots so that we're able to take advantage of what we know. And finally is bringing all brains to the table, all perspectives. And so back to Indigenous knowledge, we heard this morning, Indigenous knowledge, Western knowledge, making sure we have a fairly traditional workforce in ocean industries. And so how do we bring underrepresented groups? How do we bring those perspectives? How do we gain that? We're trying to solve complicated problems, and we need to bring multiple perspectives to the table. So.
Thanks a lot, Kendra. I mean, you highlighted some practical examples, which is always great in terms of the data collaborations on predictive fishing. You mentioned the great work on bringing the applied research community together, and Indigenous and Western knowledge. So there's some really good examples there. I don't know whether this is the time is correct here, but apparently we're running out of time. I'd like to ask just briefly each of you in terms of how can we really help to bring more of these kind of amazing ocean entrepreneurs, startups, and stakeholders to the fore. I mean, we heard earlier about these great examples of the spotlights. How can we support the new kind of ocean entrepreneurs? Very briefly. Kendra, obviously, you're actually one of our mentors as part of the World Ocean Initiative's Ocean Changemakers Challenge, which, by the way, is open for applications. You work with a variety of startups and entrepreneurs in Canada. So what is your experience? What is your key learnings from that in terms of helping ocean entrepreneurs? And given we are running out of time, very briefly, please.
Yeah, so our second project was our startup project, which was really focused on increasing the number of Canadian startups focused on ocean. And one of our learnings there is just having a concentrated conversation. So that was raising awareness around the opportunity, raising awareness for our technology companies on what the opportunities are in ocean, helping people and companies understand the link to climate. Our young entrepreneurs want to be connected to making a difference on the climate journey, and ocean is a huge part of that journey. So how do we raise awareness? And then mentorship, so helping to be able to understand what it means to build a business. There's lots of complexity to that. And finally, financing. So we are part of that solution in terms of being able to provide financing through our startup program, our Ocean Challenge, as well as our projects. But it is still a hard area for investors to understand. So again, raising that awareness and helping those companies find investing opportunities.
Amazing. Great work that you're doing on raising awareness, the mentorship program, and of course, the connection with finance, which is absolutely crucial. Andy, briefly as well, in terms of your experience at UNDP's Water and Ocean Governance Program, you obviously work in various ways to support ocean innovation and entrepreneurs. In your experience, how can ocean entrepreneurs, startups, other important ocean stakeholders be supported in order to build this kind of ocean innovation ecosystem?
So, quite honestly, Martin, even back to 2017, with the first ocean conference here in New York, it was already clear that most, if all, the SDG 14 targets were well behind. Don't forget, SDG 14 had the most ambitious targets, 4 due in 2020, 1 in 2025. So even back then, it was clear we were not making the progress that's needed. And so UNDP, with very great support ultimately from Norway and Sweden, we launched a new initiative called the Ocean Innovation Challenge. And as the name suggests, it was designed to identify, finance, mentor, and incubate all kinds of ocean innovations, recognizing that the problems we've heard about today that need solutions still, they don't require incremental or small change. They require transformational, systemic change in some of the key ocean sectors, fisheries, shipping, and of course, the whole climate change agenda. So the OIC, we call it the OIC, we've launched it now, 1, 2, 3 calls for proposals. The first was on marine pollution. We received over 600 submissions from all walks, startups, private companies, but also NGOs, governments, other UN, and so forth. And we harvested down that first 600 to 8. We picked 8 projects that had the highest gradings and had the highest potential to be transformational. I'll just give you a couple examples. 3 of them are working in Comoros, Costa Rica and the Maldives, introducing extended producer responsibility frameworks for plastics in the national legislation of those countries. Never been done, and pretty much never been done, in the developing world. So very important, particularly in light of the UNEA resolution. We hope this can set an example for the kinds of actions countries will need to do when this convention on plastics is negotiated. Another project is very exciting. It's called Fortuna Coolers, based in San Francisco, working in the Philippines. They figured out a way to take the millions, if not billions, of waste coconut husks that are thrown away every year in the Philippines and convert them to a coolant material that is a replacement for polystyrene. And of course, so this is a potential game changer for obviously the pollution from polystyrene, and it's not only an organic substitute, but it's more affordable, and apparently it works better too. So we're very excited about that. Last little example, a company working out of Spain, but working in Mexico and Morocco, called Ficostera, are working to sustainably harvest kelp and use the production of organic fertilizer that is more effective, has less pollution, and costs less than traditional industrial fertilizer. So just a few examples.
Amazing. This is exactly what we want to hear. Those practical examples, the Ocean Innovation Challenge you mentioned, the great work on the plastics treaty in terms of extended producer responsibility and the fertilizer work. I know we're running out of time. Whitney, briefly, in terms of you're working with various organizations, startups, organizations through Uplink, for example. Very briefly, your experience of how ocean entrepreneurs can be supported, how startups and other stakeholders can be supported through an supportive innovation ecosystem.
Yes. So the segment of I would say the startups or the innovators that I know best are those in the blue carbon space, they have ideas for, okay, there's this incredible ecosystem that we can restore, and we could generate a new flow of revenue to our local community, and yet there are many hurdles to bringing a project like that to market. It is incredibly intensive from a technical standpoint to conduct the feasibility studies, to set up the project, and then determine the validation and the verification of the carbon. And so what I'm hearing is that there is a need for patient capital and risk-tolerant capital upfront early to help those entrepreneurs bring their project to market. And there's also a need for capacity building. And of course, the policies need to be in place in order to foster that type of project in the respective countries. So there are a lot of challenges, but there are some of the things that we're doing to help bridge the gap for some of those ecopreneurs, is what we call them at Salesforce, is we have a philanthropy fund for ecosystem restoration and conservation and climate justice, which we announced at COP26 last year, of $100 million. And so over the last few months, we then dispersed the first tranche of $11 million, which we announced in April. And one of those, there were 12 recipients, but I'll speak to one of them, which is the Ocean Foundation, working with the Mayan community in the southern part of Mexico to help in restoring their seascapes, so mangroves, seagrass, corals, in order to build resilience for that community. So the philanthropic funds can help them with the feasibility studies, and then ultimately they can then bring that project to market and develop a new source of revenue then for that community as they also build their sustainable tourism and other solutions. And because you mentioned Uplink, that particular project ties into Uplink as well, in fact. Uplink is a crowdsourcing platform that we built in partnership with the World Economic Forum. It's run by the World Economic Forum. And this past year, we also then ran in partnership with WEF a blue carbon challenge. And at actually the Economist World Ocean Summit, the 12 top innovators from the challenge were announced. And those innovators, one of those innovators is the Ocean Foundation and the project in Mexico that I mentioned. But those innovators will then, as a part of the Uplink program, will then be connected with additional resources and technical expertise for that capacity building piece. So what I'm hearing is funding and capacity building is what's needed, and those are a couple of the solutions that we're bringing to play.
Amazing. Thanks a lot. The funding, capacity building, as you mentioned, in the blue carbon space, there's such an exciting space, as we heard from Ralph, as we heard from the seaweed chef, and as we heard from Uganda. There's so much happening in that space. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but otherwise we would have talked a little bit more about blue finance. But thanks for going full circle back to Ralph's presentation in terms of highlighting the need for patient capital, the need to identify and validate and verify these kind of blue carbon projects. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I'd like to thank the panelists for your great insights. The conversation, of course, continues. There will be more conversations at the UN Ocean Conference, at the World Ocean Summit. All of the topics we discussed are also being discussed on the World Ocean Initiative, ocean.economist.com. Finance, governance, innovation are the 3 pillars we have identified in the initiative, which are exactly the themes that we need to kind of build that, revitalize the ocean economy. So we've heard about the need for collaboration. We've heard about the need to have the right framework, the right policy framework, and to build capacity and to, of course, include communities. You mentioned the need for indigenous communities and bringing the knowledge in, and community-based ecosystem restoration projects. And blue carbon is obviously the big opportunity here. So thanks a lot again to the panelists. Thanks a lot to the audience. And I'll hand back to Amber for the next session. Thank you very much.